Good morning, everybody. Welcome to English class. I'm Mr. McLaughlin, and for the next 5 weeks, we're going to suffer through summer school together. Not really. I'm going to try to make this anything but suffering for both of us, but suffering is going to come up in the independent study novels, so I thought I would just allude to it. So every day, I plan to start off by having a video like this, only hopefully better. Hopefully I get a little bit better at this every day, where I give you a summary of what the lesson is going to be about and maybe do a little bit of teaching about particular skills that I think you're going to need extra help with. These videos are going to last no more than 15 minutes because that's all I'm entitled to on YouTube right now. So as far as what the lessons will look like, if one day here in the summer represents 3 days of a normal school year, then it makes sense to me that I should break the lessons up into 3 parts, which is what I plan to do. Every day I will release the lesson. I'm not going to be posting them up in advance like the entire course or even the entire unit. I'm going to be posting them day by day because that's the pace that you should be working at. Now, for some of you who are really keen, you might not like this idea. You might say, well, Mr. M, I wanted to really get a jump on this. I want to get ahead in the course. Well, you can get ahead in the course. The way that you're going to get ahead in the course is by covering your readings. So, Heart of Darkness is the text that we're going to use for Unit 2. During Unit 1, you should be reading Heart of Darkness on top of everything else. In the evenings, when you want to, well, I guess it's summertime, so you wouldn't be like cuddling up with a book in front of a fireplace. Maybe you'd be like out in the back porch enjoying the breeze. You could be reading Heart of Darkness and getting ahead that way. Okay, I think that's enough talking about the course in general. Now let's talk about today's lesson. It's pretty simple. It's broken up into 3 parts, and the first part is a review of terminology. Basically, I want you to understand that there are a variety of literary devices that you should know, and you can categorize these into things like structural devices, stylistic devices, poetic devices, narrative devices, rhetorical devices. Think of it like a house, all right? There are certain things that are essential for a house. You cannot have a house without a foundation. You cannot have a house without walls. You cannot have a house without a roof. Those are structural things. The same thing goes, for example, with paragraphs in an essay. You cannot have an essay without paragraphs. You cannot have an essay without a thesis statement. These things are structural with, regards to a story. You can't have a story without plot, characters, or setting. Those are things that are essential. You cannot have a story without them. All right? Structural devices. Then there's stylistic devices. Those are things that you need them. You can't opt out of having them, but the author has got some choice. So for example, the tone of writing. Every piece of writing has got a particular tone. Now, if you're writing an essay, you're going to be using a persuasive tone. If you are writing a funny anecdote, you're probably not going to want to use a persuasive tone. You're going to want to use a humorous tone. The tone that you use in your writing, that's a stylistic device. It's like, for example, the number of windows that you include in your house, or if you're going to have the door facing the east side or the north side. Every house needs to have a door, but there's no one place where that door has to be. Every house needs to have windows. I guess you could have a house without windows, but I wouldn't want to live in one. But you can choose the style of windows that you include. You might want to have a big picture window down in the front room. You might want to have those I forget what they're called, but in the castle, those turret style windows, the slit windows there that archers could fire out of. You might want to have those upstairs if you were a history nut or something. Those are style choices. Now, then comes the next 3. Those are rhetorical devices when it comes to the art of persuasion, narrative devices when it comes to telling a story, and poetic devices, which are kind of like narrative devices and rhetorical devices, but they're also specific to poetry. These are things that are totally optional when it gets down to it. You could write a poem if you wanted to without using any metaphors or any similes or any personification or rhyme or alliteration. You don't have to use any of those things when writing a poem. I don't know how good the poem would be if you didn't use any. The second part is going to be just a quick thing on specifically poetic style and structure. And it's a very quick lesson. It has to do with looking at the structure and the style of poetry. So for example, the poet's choice whether to write in lyrical verse, blank verse, or free verse. That's a style choice. The poet has to write in some type of verse. They have to write some way in order to write a poem, but they get to choose. So you'll be looking at some things that have to do specifically with poetry in the second part, and you'll be looking at one of my favorite poems of all time by Simon and Garfunkel, The Sound of Silence. For those of you who like classic rock, good news, so do I. So I'm going to be bringing it up from time to time. For those of you who don't like classic rock, just bear with me. The third part of the lesson, the reason why the second part is maybe a little bit short is because the third part is going to be pretty taxing. It's the heaviest part. This is going to be on literary criticism and literary theory. Literary theories are basically lenses that a person looks through when they are criticizing or engaging with a text of some sort, which is a fancy way of saying it is a lens that changes the way that I see a story. So for example, if I am a feminist, I am going to see things a little bit differently than somebody who is not. And I'll give you a really good example. In the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, Canadians were overjoyed when Sidney Crosby scored the overtime winning goal to beat the Americans so that Canada won the gold medal in hockey. We were absolutely overjoyed by that, unless we were feminists. Because if I was a feminist, I would probably take exception to the fact that the female hockey team also won the gold medal and didn't receive nearly the amount of recognition that their male counterparts did. Feminism is also going to influence the way that you see a piece of literature. So for example, Lady Macbeth. We teach Macbeth in grade 10 at our school, and I think most schools do teach Macbeth. Lady Macbeth, a lot of people might interpret her as being, for example, like a shrew archetype, being sort of like an unruly wife who, in a sense, ruins her husband. But as a feminist, you might look at Lady Macbeth and say that, you know, she's a really good character because she's got a strength that is unusual for the time. She is at least equal to her husband in terms of like resolve as a character. She's the one who comes up with the plan to kill King Duncan so that her husband can take the throne. She's the one who holds him together on the night of the murders. So as a feminist, you would interpret Lady Macbeth's character differently than somebody who is not. You'll also interpret Macbeth a little bit differently if you're an existentialist than if you're not. So existentialism, there's a video that I've linked to, but existentialism is basically the idea that people are constantly searching for meaning in a fairly meaningless universe. And the problem is meaning is constantly being imposed upon us by authorities. And a lot of us end up living meaningless lives because we have meaning imposed upon us. In a sense, our lives get hijacked by outside forces. So for example, if your parents instill you with a sense of values and you live your life based on those values, are you really living your life at all? An existentialist would say, no, you don't actually really exist because any choices that you're making are not choices that you're actually making. They've already been made for you. And if somebody is making your choices for you, then do you really exist at all? So Macbeth, typically we look at it as being the cautionary tale of a man who had too much ambition, and that ambition led to his downfall. But if you're an existentialist, you would see things a little bit differently. So, Macbeth, before the play really unfolds, what is he? Macbeth is simply another nobleman who's fighting in King Duncan's army, and he's a great fighter. Duncan decorates him for his valor in war. But think about it: Macbeth is risking his life for somebody else, and who is that somebody? Duncan is just some guy, and people have decided that he's king, and as a result, I have to fight for him. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it, right? Macbeth, the point is, the existential would look at this and say, you know what? Macbeth isn't even really existing at this point. He's controlled by King Duncan, and then he's also controlled by his wife. It's very clear that she calls shots for him. And really, at the beginning of the play, Macbeth isn't living much of a life at all. His life is completely meaningless. And it's only when he starts to become a really bad guy that things start to turn around for him. So here's what you have to understand. Our concepts of what good and bad are pretty arbitrary, all right? So I want you to think about it like this. Macbeth kills King Duncan to become king. Is that really bad? Well, Duncan lorded over other human beings, and that authority was based on basically nothing except for, at some point in history, somebody in his family took power in some way, and now Macbeth is taking power from him. Is that right? Is it wrong? Well, to the existentialist, the right decision is the one that the person actually makes if they made it. So when Macbeth makes the decision to kill King Duncan, he makes what's called an authentic decision, and he starts existing. And throughout the play, the second part of it, as Macbeth becomes worse and worse of a human being, he exists more and more because he starts to make decisions for himself. Like, he's the one who decides to kill Banquo. He doesn't even tell Lady Macbeth what he's going to do. That's an authentic decision. Macbeth starts living his life, and so the existentialist would say, actually, instead of being a story of this really rotten guy who does a lot of rotten things and ends up getting paid back for them in full, it's the story of somebody who was living a meaningless life and turned things around. So literary criticisms, there's 6 of them we're going to look at, and some of them are fairly complicated. Structuralism is huge. It took me a long time to condense it down to what I wanted to share with you. It's complicated. Deconstruction is complicated. Marxism is fairly complicated. So take your time with this part of the lesson. Make sure you read my descriptions. You have a look at the videos that go along with them. You put thought into it. Do some additional looking if you need to. Do a little bit more looking and ask questions. But it's really important that you end up understanding these literary theories, because these are going to come up again and again. I'd like to stress the fact that when it comes to me designing lessons and deciding what's going to be in the course and what's not going to be in the course, I pick and choose things based on what's going to be the most relevant and what can come up again and again. And literary criticism is extremely important, all right? So those are the 3 parts of your lesson: review of literary terms, a look at poetic style, structure, and devices, and literary criticism. That's it for today. Get to work and let me know if you need my help.